So in an effort to make sure that we don't have a repeat occurrence of the Mike Tomlin press conference, specifically the very end, where there was the walk-away, walk-off question that never was, is there a question I should avoid with the two of you here on Cardinals Underground? Paul Calvisi, Darren Urban, Dani, Sureck. Is there a third rail sort of question that I could pose that I should stay away from? For example,
that we wouldn't want to answer, Paul?
Right. Like with Dani, I mean, if I might be so bold, the green bean casserole. Probably shouldn't bring up the green bean casserole, right, Dani?
That's fine. I'll defend it.
I was going to say she's going to answer that.
Ask away, Paul.
You got to ask something that isn't going to be asked.
Oh, okay. Well, I just want to make sure if there's any sort of out of bounds, territory or topics that I should avoid at all costs.
I got to be honest, Paul. There's probably a few that pop into my mind, but I'm not going to bring them up because
student loans, for example.
They need to stay.
You're not a big fan of student loans with 2 college-age kids or
Honestly,
so.
Honestly, I did a good job and got them through school with no debt.
There you go.
And no loans.
Okay.
So
okay. All right. Good.
We're good. We're happy about that.
Okay.
You can keep poking. Eventually, you'll probably hit something that I wouldn't want to talk about, but I'm okay with a student. I mean, I don't love student loans.
You guys are already ahead of the game, at least based on the fact
that you just don't know enough about us.
No, you're ahead of the game.
And we're going to keep it that way.
For the start of this week, okay, you guys are at least winning in the fact you showed up for your duties here, your broadcast duties, as opposed to the brain trust of the Dallas Cowboys that decided to bag out on their radio show this week.
Well, maybe that's a third
Jerry
row.
Jones and Stephen Jones. You're right. You know what? Let me write that down.
If I recall, I'm pretty sure they did the same thing right before they let go Jason Garrett.
Okay. Did you hear the little anecdote from Mike Tirico? Yeah, they were at Kansas City, and he said it was the second half of the game at some point, he said, "Hey, Mike, you idiot," right? He's talking about himself, holding himself accountable because he thought all the fans turning around and snapping pictures was because of Jason Garrett, the former Cowboys head coach, when in fact they were directly above Taylor Swift.
I love it.
So
no, it is interesting because Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones, they go on a local radio station every week, and they decided not to go on it this week after that loss. Which I think technically, I would assume that deal, that agreement, probably ends as soon as the Cowboys season ends. But still, you don't have to be a former employee to know that those two love any chance for publicity and going on the radio. So it's something to keep your eye on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of coaching things that could still happen. I mean, this is by far the most coaching questions over coaches that made the freaking playoffs. I mean, if we're talking about Tomlin, we're talking about McCarthy, we're talking about Nick Sirianni.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the question that led to Mike Tomlin walking off the podium was, Coach, you have 1 year left in your contract, ... He gone. He just bolted right there.
Which, to me, that's the worst response you could have. I mean, what, as opposed to getting up there and saying, what, Paul? Like, I'm not concerned about that right now. That's not at the forefront of my mind. Like, that's all you have to say.
But he hasn't won a playoff game in 7 years. And Najee Harris among those in the locker room saying there needs to be change, at least in how some rules are set, according to Najee Harris.
When we start talking about the coaching changes that have happened, not just the potential ones in the playoffs, but we're talking about, Pete Carroll. I mean, Mike Tomlin, Pete Carroll. Bill Belichick. I've long been a person. I get it why you're there long term. I get it. I think Mike Tomlin is an excellent coach, but I do think that after a while it can get stale. And obviously Tomlin's had super success for a long time. Belichick did the same thing. There is exceptions to the rule, but even then, like you just said, the Steelers haven't advanced very far in a long time. They're winning games, but they're in this purgatory where they never have a losing record, so they never have a good enough draft pick to really improve their team.
Is it recency bias to say that the circumspection of head coaches is thus in 2024 that even playoff coaches are more likely to get canned than ever before? Whether it's in Philly, that's a playoff team. Whether it's Dallas, that's a playoff team. The Steelers might make a coaching change, a playoff team.
I got a couple. One, I want to. It does bother me a little bit. I mean, if you're Nick Sirianni and you just got to the Super Bowl, and then a year later, after an 11-win season, and your job's in, I struggle with a little bit. I understand they might have had issues, but I struggle with that. But it's funny that you're talking about. Obviously, we brought up the Cowboys. I asked this of my two sons who have grown up Cardinals fans because they live here and they were born here. They're the fans of the local teams, and obviously me working for the team doesn't hurt that equation. But I asked them, I said, be as objective as you can. Would you rather be a Cardinals fan or a Cowboys fan? Cowboys fans get to enjoy a lot of victories, but they have expectations that just seem to just rip at the soul, where I understand Cardinals fans don't have that as much, and they obviously get upset when the team loses. But there seems to be some highs there when the Cardinals do well, which do the Cowboys have any highs if they don't win the Super Bowl? Like, it just seems like a miserable existence.
The stat I saw, by the way, is since the Barry Switzer Super Bowl win, which was some 30 years ago, they've won 4 of 16 playoff games. So to Darren's point, they make the postseason with regularity. They win a lot of regular season games. Very little playoff success over the last 3 decades.
The reason I was laughing is because I could only imagine my dad's response, who was a lifelong Cowboys fan.
Well, he's a lifelong listening to Cardinals Underground,
I got calls from my dad, from my brother-in-law saying, I am not even a Cowboys fan anymore. I am full in on the Bird Gang, Cardinals only. I think part of that is just with the Cowboys specifically, such a storied franchise and a franchise that has had so much success. A lot of this fan base are people who were fans when the Cowboys were winning. And that's not just in Texas. That's all over the U.S., all over the world, because, there weren't a lot of teams, or they weren't being played on local stations the way the Cowboys were. I think that's part of my, at least, understanding is some of that frustration is when you're talking about Cardinals versus Cowboys is the expectations are through the roof because you have had success. Yes, it was a long time ago, but that's what a lot of the fan base is used to, and that's their expectation.
You didn't answer the question, though. Do you think it's better for a person to be a Cowboys fan or a Cardinals fan for that reason? I'm like, again, I'm not trying to look. I work for the team. I'm acknowledging that this team obviously has had its struggles, and trust me, I interact with the Cardinals fan base on a daily basis. I understand the anger that some of them have that the Cardinals have struggled mightily, but it crossed my mind. Having gone through, for instance, and obviously this has been forever ago now, but 15 years ago, going through that Super Bowl run, I don't know if a Cowboys fan could have such a fun Super Bowl run as the Cardinals did in 2008, because if you're expecting them to be not only in the Super Bowl but winning the Super Bowl, every step, where's the joy?
Well, I think that was part of it. Before the playoff game, Mike McCarthy's job was already supposedly on the line in Dallas. That was already a talking point before kickoff even happened.
Look, the 2 most memorable / meaningful moments from the first playoff weekend to me were both from the Detroit game. And one has a Cardinals connection to me. When the fans didn't leave the stadium, that reminded me of the 2008 NFC Championship win.
Yeah.
You just have a fan base that was soaking in the moment, didn't want it to end, didn't want to leave. That was the Lions fan base in that moment. That video of Jared Goff leaving the field, and he was the last player to leave the field because he did an infinite number of post-game interviews out on the field. Everyone's still in their seats, still giving him a standing O. I thought that was really cool, and it reminded me of the Cardinals 2008. And then the cutaway, with all due respect to Taylor Swift, the most meaningful cutaway was the shot of the Lions season ticket holder, 89 years of age.
Yeah.
In his 66th season as a ticket holder.
He has seen some stuff, let me tell you.
And as my old man, who's a Detroit native, who used to go to the Lions games,
I'm a Detroit native.
And I've heard, so have you not heard your share over the years? Oh, when Bobby Lane won the 1957 NFL title, and back when the Lions were playing at Tiger Stadium, that guy was there for that game.
My grandmother passed away of lung cancer 2003. I think. And the last I got a chance to talk to her. It was right at the end of the football season, and we didn't know quite how bad she was. But the last chance I had to talk to her, I was on the phone with her, and we were talking about the Lions. And Joey Harrington was the quarterback.
Yes,
and
sure.
I said, what do you think, Graham? You think Joey Harrington's the answer? And she's like, pfft. She's like, they're the Lions. He's never going to pan out. And she was right.
Okay, someone who covered the Lions for a couple of years back when they had Chris Spielman and Barry Sanders and Lomas Brown
Some great
and
players.
all that. Most of the Lions fans, their mantra was, we couldn't win even when we had Barry Sanders. But they figured it out. And what did they do? And this is where, if you're a Cardinals fan, you hope it's a case study. They came in, they changed the culture. They got a lot more physical. They got a lot more demanding. They put a lot more accountability into the equation. They rebuilt the offensive line. I mean, that Lions offensive line had its way in that game. And so they put a lot of assets into that. They got a premier pass rusher, number 2 overall, in Aiden Hutchinson, which is foreshadowing. I'm going to talk about the Cardinals' need in that area a little bit later and why it trumps the need for a receiver. Anyway, you look at everything that they did in Detroit, and I think there are a lot of parallels to where the Cardinals are tracking and trending. And hopefully, think about it, a Dan Campbell in his first year had 3 wins, started year 2 1-6, and then it's been a complete turnaround ever since.
I agree. I think we've talked about that from the beginning of the culture and the effort that is being played every single game and playing for each other and playing for this coaching staff. And I think there are parallels. This is not a situation where before this head coach, this coaching staff took over, it felt like the approach was kind of, okay, let's just find a couple of pieces, right? It was more of a free agency but that was more of the approach of finding those veteran players and trying to plug in and do that. And this has been a complete haul, and it feels like it's going more young players, right? Like not as experienced, but trying to build players up and build around that. And that also feels similar to what Detroit has done. That's why I feel like, to almost go back to your question, Darren, is right now it's probably better to be a Cardinals fan because you can feel that it is within reason to have hope that things are turning around for the better and that a true foundation is being set. The Cardinals aren't trying to just plug in players where they need it and patch in some holes and try and get by with who they have. You can tell that things are really being changed, and that's why I think that this organization is trending upwards. Truly is a good example like Detroit, is you have the right people in place and everybody is playing with the right mindset, a true team mindset, and that I still think when you've got Kyler Murray as your quarterback, that absolutely elevates the rest of your team. No disrespect to somebody like Jared Goff, but when you've got a quarterback like Kyler Murray, makes your chances of finding success a whole lot better.
Also, I've been mulling this in my head while Dani was talking because I can't think of anybody else. I don't know if I could think of 2 coaches that if you drop them in their respective team's locker room and put them in a uniform and send them out there with a team, more that you could see them fitting in whatever positions they play. Jonathan Gannon in the defensive backfield, Dan Campbell back at tight end. I mean, obviously Jonathan Gannon with his hip history is long past that, but still.
Saying they have that player mentality is what you're saying.
There's that feel to it. They're coaches, and they do handle it a little bit different. I mean, we're never going to get a bite the kneecaps quote out of Jonathan Gannon, I don't think. I think he plays it closer to the vest than Dan Campbell will in terms of publicly. But
Gannon had his "We want killers" comment.
That's true. He did.
And so, I mean,
although that was something that was said behind the scenes that got out rather than something he said in a press conference.
Yeah. So, but you're right. It is a similar mentality. I also think Brad Holmes, the GM, who's done an amazing job of pulling Amon-Ra St. Brown out of the 4th round, and he's an all-pro receiver. Michael Wilson, maybe? Hello. Just throwing that out there. To do that sort of roster-building reconstruction, and then to actually show emotion. Did you see the video that went viral where he's on right?
Diz was in the elevator, too, I noticed.
Does that remind you of another GM, maybe in the tunnel after a win?
That's a good point.
Celebrating, showing emotion with the players. You know, there's some similarities, I think, in there. And then you had a motivated Jared Goff. Don't forget, the Rams traded not only Goff, but 2 first-round picks for Matthew Stafford. So Goff went out there, and he was really motivated.
Which I loved post-game. Do you see Dan Campbell handing out that game ball to Goff, and all he had to say was, "You're good enough for us here in Detroit"? Yes. I love that.
Yeah. Now, I do want to, I mean, again, the margins here are so little. I mean, they only won by a point. It's not like they rolled over the Rams.
I get it, yeah.
And I'm not saying they're not a great team or they're not going in the right direction, but like it's just funny how different this conversation could be if the Rams would have made one more field goal.
Do you think the Rams were a tougher playoff opponent than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be? I mean, the Rams were red hot going into the postseason. They started 3-6, won 7 out of 8. Matthew Stafford was dealing. Now, they didn't get enough pressure on Jared Goff. The stat was on pass attempts where there was no pressure on Jared Goff, he was 22 of 22, which once again reinforces quarterback, get to the quarterback.
Well, considering the Buccaneers blitzed like 90% of the time against the Eagles,
Yes.
I think that's going to change.
That was another memorable moment was Todd Bowles, the big wide smile at the
Which
end. Because
so
you
rarely,
you
yes.
never
so
see
rarely.
Todd smile.
It was nice.
And he gave that big beaming smile. And that was one you never see. And then number two, to your point, Darren, what you always see out of Todd Bowles is leading the league in blitz rate.
Yes.
And he did like 2/3 of the time he brought the heat.
Early in the game, I happened to have on the Manning cast, and Peyton Manning's like, every time they go empty, they're blitzing. And I started watching, I'm like, oh my God, every single time they were in empty, they blitzed.
Yes. And Eagles had no answer.
No, that was really bad.
I mean, think about. So Nick Sirianni, okay, they start 10-1. They lose 6 of the last 7, including the playoff loss. What team does that remind you of in recent history?
Absolutely,
2021.
unfortunate.
And how can you not be Jeffrey Lurie wondering we lost Jonathan Gannon, we lost Shane Steichen?
I kept thinking of Jonathan Gannon. Obviously, you're thinking.
To what
of
degree were they
Gannon.
propping up Nick Sirianni?
But I gotta the missed tackles. Every coach hates that. But I was just imagining if Jonathan Gannon was coaching a team like that, and I'll be honest, I couldn't picture a team Jonathan Gannon was coaching missing tackles like that.
I literally said to my son during that game, I said, you know what? It's almost like the Eagles are using the change in defensive coordinator as an excuse to mail in the rest of the season because they're going out there with zero want to.
But can you now put that performance still on your defensive coordinator and the change? Is that really the answer with Matt Patricia if you're seeing a performance like that?
See,
right? Because here's the thing: it was one game, and that was all the Eagles fans. They were going after Jonathan Gannon with the Super Bowl loss and saying how his head wasn't in it because he took the Cardinals job and all this stuff. I haven't looked. Are they going after Matt Patricia the same after a performance like that? I know, but
they're going after the head coach now.
Hey, are Cowboys fans going after Dan Quinn? His name's in like a half dozen different head coaching interviews
they don't want to
right
lose
now.
him.
And was he preoccupied? Was he distracted? Because effective the next morning, he was going to be interviewing for head coaching gigs around the league. In fact, can I give you a hot take? How about the fact that the Lions, both of their coordinators, who is it, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, they're both scheduled to interview with a handful of teams after practice Friday and Saturday. Oh, the Lions are going to lose against the Tampa Bay Bucks because their two coordinators are going to interview for head coaching gigs at the end of this week. Obviously, they won't be playoff ready.
Why don't they change it to where you can't interview until maybe not once your team is done, but post Super Bowl?
For everybody, though?
Yeah, for head coaching roles.
Because ultimately, when the Super Bowl's over, everybody's going to the Combine 6 days later, and everybody needs to have their stuff
staff,
in place.
Yeah.
I mean,
I just feel like it would. I'm not saying that coaches are not able to have their minds and prepare and still be, but it's it feels like it would eliminate that argument.
Well, to me, the argument isn't. I mean, Paul and I were around a team where Todd Haley was essentially, everybody knew he was going to be the Chiefs head coach before the Super Bowl was played. And honestly, that didn't take away from what he did in the Super Bowl. I thought actually he did a good job in the Super Bowl. If you had any argument, is that he didn't go to the hurry up faster, but he had good. It wasn't because he was distracted. No, it was because he was scared to death. Kurt Warner was going to get hurt in the first quarter because they didn't have an offensive line that could hold up to the Steelers pass rush. But
by the way, my wry smile was later he admitted in an interview he wished he would have opened up the offense earlier, not just the second half.
Of course.
That he would have, brought
they all think that.
Pass first in the first half.
And I've talked to him multiple times about it. And again, the concern was if Kurt Warner gets hurt in the beginning of the second quarter, they're done. So we've got to find a way to shorten this game. But anyways, I don't think that should be a big issue. I understand where you're coming from, but unless they change the draft and the combine and that whole schedule, which
and
they're
then
not
and
gonna.
then the off season and rookie minicamp, OTAs, okay.
So here you are. Cardinals have a head coach. They have a GM, obviously. What sort of head start do you think that gives them on 2024? To what degree, now in hindsight, hit rewind, were the Cardinals always playing catch-up last year just because the year started with a brand new set of decision makers?
Yes. I think that would be any team that you're having to have a new general manager and a new head coach and all the pieces that go with that. I think, too, you're having to look at the situation of what the Cardinals were this time a year ago. And so I don't know if that's necessarily playing from behind, playing catch up as much as that was just the situation. I think any coach, any general manager in front office, people who came in knew that there were going to be pieces that were on the Cardinals roster when they came that they were not going to want on this roster when the season ended, and that you knew you were going to be playing with a thinner roster when you're looking at the pieces you have and the depth. And not to say that it was a lost cause. You weren't expecting to win or be competitive. I do think the Cardinals were a lot more competitive than anybody gave them credit for at the start of the year. So I do think, yes, you were playing catch up to an extent. I also think that was just the situation that the Cardinals were in. But I do think that when you have an entire new staff in front office, there's a lot of decisions that have to be made, not just with personnel, but also the culture and the vision of the future and who you're hiring to get to that winning culture and to get to those wins and that end goal. I do think it is impressive in a calendar year what we have seen from this Cardinals team, which starts at the very top, and the improvements that we saw in a calendar year.
I think catch-up is inevitable, but I also had to do with where this team was. I mean, this team was starting from scratch in a lot of ways with not just the hires, but what they wanted to do with the team and nearing clear cap space. I mean, I don't think any of that was going to filter out in one season, so why rush things? And it's that's an important thing when you bring in a new brain trust. Like when you start rushing stuff, that you can make mistakes.
I guess I would also contend you think you know what you have. Do you really know until the games begin? For example,
No.
Greg Dortch. If they were really honest, did they think Greg Dortch was even going to make the final 53? But he balled out during all those camp practices. Was one of the last guys I would surmise to make the roster. Didn't get much playing time. But by the time you hit December, okay, wait a minute. This guy's a keeper. He can play. And so, whereas other situations, Marco Wilson, your number one corner, didn't even play down the stretch and wasn't even there for the final couple of games. So there were things you can only learn in game situations.
I think the same kind of in the opposite realm would be like tight end Trey McBride. I'm sure they saw good things of him, and the truth is, last season, the few opportunities that McBride really had to shine, he didn't make the most of them. There were a good amount of drops or miscommunication. So I think in the opposite realm of someone like Marco Wilson, you look at a Trey McBride and you probably think you have an idea of what he could become. I don't know that they expected him to blossom and grow and thrive the way he did the second half of the season.
I mean, they didn't know until Zach Ertz got hurt.
No.
Honestly, to your point.
And even if they did have some ideas, as long as Zach Ertz was playing, there was a
McBride
block
needed
there.
those reps. He needed the confidence. He needed the chemistry with his quarterback.
And you don't, again, they played to win. They played to do as best they could at the beginning of the season. And I know Jonathan Gannon denied the tale of two seasons the whole time, but it's hard not to look at this team and say, you were really going to have a hard time, especially offensively, knowing exactly what you were going to have and do until Kyler came back on the field.
And Michael Wilson said so. The final post-game radio interview. It just took time. Those were his words. Took time for the coaches to learn the players' strong suits. Took time for everybody to be fluent in the offense. Took time for Kyler to learn the receivers. So to me, at the very least, there's the known and the unknown. The one known is, I would think, there are far fewer questions for Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenfort entering this offseason. Are there still questions, significant areas that need to be remedied and improved? Absolutely. Just not as many questions. Now, the degree of difficulty in some of these questions might be great, like where do you find that game-wrecking pass rusher? How do you resolve...
You did say you were going to bring that up, Paul.
Well, I'm just saying that if you look at for example, I gave you the stat on Jared Goff, how effective he was, correct? You have to figure out a way, I think, and this is the priority of the offseason, is getting to the quarterback. You got to find that guy. Unfortunately, I don't think that guy's there at number 4.
Nope.
And because of that, I don't think you can afford to take a receiver at number 4. I know there's one mock draft out there right now that has Marvin Harrison Jr. going 3, and then the Cardinals still taking receiver at 4.
To New England?
Yes.
Stays at New England.
I mean, no, that's
Okay.
not. And I don't think that's going to happen with this set of decision makers. I think they value the line of scrimmage so much. I just don't see them going receiver at 4 right now.
I agree.
I was leading that charge for a long time. I'm now wavering if Marvin Harrison is on the board, if that could change. I don't know if they do it otherwise. The thing is your implication is what? That they take an offensive lineman or that they trade down?
Either one. Either you take that. If he's worthy of 4, the Penn State or Notre Dame tackle, you go that route, or you trade down. Now, the lesson learned 15 years ago was once upon a time you passed up on Terrell Suggs
20 years ago. 2003.
And you cashed that in for 2 lower first-round picks that ended up being Brian Johnson and Calvin Pace. Swing and a miss. You missed out on a Hall of Famer. So I get it, and obviously Larry Fitzgerald was a grand slam and number 3 overall. My inclination is to think that this set of decision makers, though, they view the line of scrimmage as so far and above a priority beyond receiver. And then when you see guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown coming out of the 4th round, you see Puka Nacua out of the 5th round, you just pulled Michael Wilson out of the 3rd round. I just think they're much more inclined, if they're going to go receiver, they end up going that route with the Texans pick, which right now is 25. And CJ Stroud, you're absolutely killing us at this point. We'll get into that in a minute.
This whole discussion is Bengals 2021, 2022, Penei Sewell versus Jamar Chase. And I think it was the 4th pick. I think. And they took Chase
or I
instead
think
of Sewell.
maybe,
Yep.
yes, because the Cowboys were right after L.A., and the Chargers took Sewell. I remember watching that. And
Lions took Sewell, right?
Who am I thinking of then? Chargers.
I don't know. I just know the Bengals had a chance to protect Joe Burrow, and they decided to get him a weapon instead. And
I'm envisioning his face, and I lost his
the
name.
Bengals, you'll think of it.
I'm going to look it up.
Okay.
Well, okay. We're in the trust tree, right? 2019, Cardinals take Kyler Murray number 1 overall. 2020, who's on the board at 8? Isaiah Simmons and Tristan Wirfs.
Yep.
Number of assistant coaches wanted the tackle.
Yep.
You got to protect that quarterback after you just drafted him number 1 overall. Cardinals went defense.
And that was a whiff.
Yeah.
A bad whiff.
Anyway, that's just my inclination at this point. So much can obviously change.
Rashawn Slater.
There you go.
That was
yeah.
it.
Yep.
Boom.
Here's how I feel about a wide receiver.
At 4, you mean?
Yes. If Marvin Harrison Jr. is the elite player, the expectations of being another Larry Fitzgerald-esque wide receiver, great. It's obviously a need. The situation the Cardinals are in right now, it is hard to argue that you should take advantage of that spot if the right player is there and not build in the trenches. You had a rotation at left guard. You now have a question at left tackle with DJ Humphries going to be recovering his ACL. Are the Cardinals going to stick with Humphries and maybe have a veteran like Kelvin Beachum stay there? Are they going to move Paris Johnson Jr.? Either way, you have questions and you have holes that need to be filled on the offensive line. You still have holes on the defensive line as well. You could absolutely use a big body there. But I agree with you, Paul. I think the lack of pass rush that we saw the second half of the season, which is really what we expected all year, the first half, the sparks we saw were a little bit of a surprise, is a glaring need. And I think when you're looking at 4, it really does make more sense to either go in the trenches, more than likely an interior offensive lineman, or a pass rusher. And we've seen in recent years, if you've got an Aiden Hutchinson, if you've got a Micah Parsons, if you got a TJ Watt, they can be absolute game changers for you. Doesn't take away later in the first round, or you want to go to day 2, right? Talking about the other glaring needs of a cornerback, you want to get a wide receiver, a D lineman, but I do think offensive line or an edge rusher right now, January 16th, I think those would really make the most sense for the Cardinals, not just immediate, but also long-term in what they are trying to build.
Well, if you're talking 4 right now, and we're way early in the process, I don't think there is a defense. There's not going to be an edge guy that should go 4.
No.
So you're basically talking offensive
line.
Yeah. Now,
which is fine.
And the name I dropped before is Brian Burns out of Carolina. If he hits the market, and we know Carolina should have locked him up a long time ago. Why would he want to stay at this point? He's going to test the market. So
They're
if
going
he's
to franchise him.
But if he somehow does hit the market, boom, that's where I could see easily that's where you make the big spend. And you don't have to give up an asset in return, unlike the Bears, who gave up a high second-round pick for Montez
What if
Sweat.
they franchise him? And do you look into a trade?
2 first-round picks? No, that's trade.
No.
Trade maybe.
It wouldn't be 2 first-round picks. It would be you'd give them the Texans first and then some other package. No, it wouldn't be.
We can see. Look, if there are deemed 4 worthy quarterbacks in this draft, because there are more than 4 teams in need of a franchise quarterback, and all of a sudden you get a haul for number 4 because a Jaden Daniels or a Michael Penix or a Bo Nix is deemed that guy, then okay. Then maybe you take some of those assets, you get in a trade like that, and
it's interesting that you bring up Suggs, who I've gone back and forth with a gentleman in the mailbag for 2 weeks now, because he's still angry about that, which I'm like, all right, it's time to move on, dude.
Yes, here's the other thing
I was just going to finish and say, you're talking to you, and you just mentioned it. Do you pass up on a Adrian Peterson? Do you pass up on a Will Anderson? Like, that's the issue that you have when you're talking about. And so that's, to me, that's the scouting comes down to, like, if you really feel like this guy is a generational guy, I think you got to give it a lot more thought than just we can get receiver later.
Absolutely. I think we are on the same page of if Marvin Harrison Jr., according to the scouting department, is everything that has been said about him as a generational talent. Take him if you think that that's going to be the difference maker for you. It is still important, though, you talk about all the time, Paul, is protecting the quarterback and getting to the quarterback. The other argument when you're talking about a wide receiver, and not necessarily Harrison, if you drop down a few spots and you're looking at a receiver or an offensive lineman, a lot of this stems back to Hollywood Brown, who is a pending free agent. He has made it clear he wants to be here. If both sides are able to agree and he's able to be here on a 1-year prove-it deal since he hasn't been healthy the 2 years he's been a Cardinal, that to me still makes sense. I think if he is healthy, with a healthy Michael Wilson, which I know sounds like we're asking a lot right now, I think what we saw in the last 2 games is if you can kind of get rolling, especially when you've got Trey McBride, you've got running backs who are good receivers, you can continue to work with what you have as a receiver, which makes the argument of getting a pass rusher or an offensive lineman at the top of the draft and then looking at a receiver either later in the first round or on day 2 and maybe getting multiple receivers at that. I think that if that's an option, if Hollywood wants to stay here and they can make it work, that can also get you by, I think, what we've seen for a year, and you continue to add more pieces, but then you're really able to justify drafting an offensive lineman or a pass rusher early.
Well, you look at the Cardinals' list of unrestricted free agents to be, and I'll be honest, maybe it's because I'm a Hollywood Brown guy, but I'm with you on that, Dani. Of all the names there, I looked at his first, and I said, you know what? Especially if it's a 1-year prove-it deal, bring him back. His season on film was so much better than in the box score. We've heard Jonathan Gannon say more than once that when I was a defensive coordinator, a guy like Hollywood Brown really scared me because he has that top-end elite speed who can stretch that defense. Just having the threat of that guy out there changes coverage schemes, and especially if he's a number 2. If you added a Marvin Harrison Jr., now Hollywood Brown is a 2, and Michael Wilson is your 3, okay. I mean, you saw what Kyler did down the stretch with a far lesser crew of receivers, and without knowing exactly what they're thinking of Rondale Moore at this point. Other names, though, on this list. I know we threw this list to Kyle Vanden Bosch. He immediately started with the defensive linemen. L.J. Collier, Carlos Watkins. We saw so little of those guys this year, but when they played, they were effective. Cardinals have a serious need in the defensive line room, obviously. Lecky Fotu has been a solid guy. I threw out there Antonio Hamilton. You're really thin in the cornerback room. And, look, to me, Antonio Hamilton is a perfect 3rd or 4th corner. And he's versatile. He can play outside. He can play inside. He has the size. You can put him on a tight end. He's over 6 foot tall, and he's that veteran presence in that room. I don't know what names jump out to you when you look at the unrestricted free agents.
I mean, to me, those you've probably hit on the guys that would catch my attention. I mean, the only other person, Blake Gillikin, the punter, I thought was pretty solid.
Yep.
Obviously, not only kicking the ball, but I thought he got better as a holder. I don't know what direction you want to go with that position. It's kind of a weird kind of situation, but I would think that would be a possibility of wanting to keep some stability there, because the long snapper Aaron Brewer is also a free agent, and that young kid Matt Hembrow, who was on IR all year, there was a reason they kept him on IR all year. And
I did not realize that.
Yes.
He was on IR all year.
Yeah, he hurt his back in preseason. They put him on IR. And you don't do that with a long snapper, an undrafted long snapper, unless you have some thoughts of the future with him, I wouldn't think.
I also think tight end Jeff Swaim. I think it's clear that Elijah Higgins has from what we saw at the end of the season, the talent to be more of a pass catcher. Now, still an important piece in that blocking role, but depending on Swaim's recovery from his injury, his knee, right, calf?
It was his calf. I talked to him. It wasn't torn. It came out. It was best case scenario. I mean, he's one of those guys that this is going to be, his injury will be a non-factor by March.
An important blocking tight end, though.
The question becomes, did they see something out of that young kid, Travis Vokalek, who they picked up from the Ravens late in the season, who's also a blocking tight end, 6'6",
big dude,
huge dude,
huge.
Do you try and get a little bit younger? I mean, Jeff Swaim's been around. Now, I think Jeff Swaim works as a veteran in the locker room, but again, how many tight ends are you going to keep? You're going to keep 4. I mean, you could do something where you kept 4 around, or you have Vokalek potentially on the practice squad or whatever. But I mean, I think they like Higgins a lot for what he's turning into receiving wise. We already talked about McBride, and so they just need to make sure that they have that one blocking.
I also wouldn't be surprised if they keep Josh Woods and Chris Barnes, those 2 linebackers who at some point in the season were also calling the defense after Kaiser White went down. I wouldn't be surprised if you bring back Josh Woods as that second middle linebacker, and that experience and the leadership and what he brought to the table.
He can play special teams. I don't know if they're going to try and upgrade there, and that's also a possibility. And see, that's the thing, is we've gotten to know these guys, and so many of them fit what they're all good dudes. They're good in the locker room, but that's what Jonathan Gannon was collecting in terms of this roster. Eventually, you're going to need to find guys that do that with a higher talent level overall. And in fact, I had a discussion with my youngest son who made the point. He's like, okay, Dad, but like, you still need the talent. You still need good enough guys to win. It can't just be about, having the right attitude. And that's the fine line they've got to walk. They've got to find guys that fit what Jonathan Gannon wants culture-wise and attitude-wise, but that can play.
Well, the other thing, too, to keep an eye on, which is different than the free agency list there, because you'd obviously have to give those players different contracts. I think there's still a handful of players carried over from the previous regime that will be here for training camp because you need bodies that I still don't think will be here at the next 53-man roster cut. And immediately, person that jumps to my mind is outside linebacker Cam Thomas, who has a healthy scratch the final 2, maybe 3 games of the season. That's a name to me where not a free agent, still on this team, doesn't seem like the cards are going to turn up in his favor of here for the long haul.
And along those lines, all the guys we're just talking about, again, you're going to re-sign them probably before free agency starts in earnest if you're going to keep them. Not all of them. Some of them will realize, okay, the market's not there, I'm going to come back. But just because, but then you'll have a draft, and then that'll impact what other positions they might play, and then you have to go through training camp. So just because they re-sign a guy, it's not like, okay, yeah, we want you on our team next year necessarily. They're still going to have to fight a way on.
I know you wrote an arc on this. The futures deals, that just guarantees the players' contracts through the offseason, correct?
Yeah, I mean, all a futures contract means is they've committed to a team for the next season. So like if a playoff team wanted to come get them now, they're off the market. So the player is basically saying, I'd rather guarantee that I have a team this offseason than sit at home on my couch hoping a playoff team would want me.
Look, I'm going to take out my crystal football. I'm going to give you a forecast on Cam Thomas. You ready for this one?
What if we're not, Paul?
He had a body analysis, Darren. It's a rhetorical question. Last offseason, and they said he could easily put on 25 to 30 pounds. His brother's a D lineman. His dad was a lineman. So even though I think to some degree the previous regime tried to make him an outside linebacker, they did, is that really his future? And if he doesn't have a future at outside linebacker based on the fact that he was a healthy scratch the last few games, then maybe he does go that route, gets in there with Buddy Morris, and all of a sudden he puts on 25 good pounds, which he supposedly can do, and then all of a sudden here you go as a 5 technique.
That's definitely possible. I remember having conversations with people about, like, okay, you had Zach Allen, he could be Zach Allen. Now, I don't know if that could pay off, and that's very possible.
And by the way, you need D linemen.
Oh, yeah.
You're in serious need for numbers at that position, right? So we'll see.
Yeah, that is a good option. He's still here under contract. I'm just not sure that's, when you're talking about edge rushers, it doesn't seem like, if you're reading the tea leaves, doesn't seem like he's one of those pieces in the future.
Are we ready to speculate about Zaven Collins in the 5th-year option? Or is that for another edition of Cardinals Underground brought to you by Pacific Office Automation?
Since they don't have to do it till May, we probably should put that off for now.
Okay. All right.
That's just me.
I'm just saying that the latest update is of the last 4 drafts, 32 picks, 8 remain with the Arizona Cardinals. 8 out of 32 over the last 4 drafts. And to your point earlier, Dani, I think that number's probably going down by the time.
Well, Lucky Fotu is one of them.
Yes.
He's the last guy from the 2020 draft, and he's a free agent, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
It is interesting that Zaven Collins was rated by Pro Football Focus as the best defender on the Cardinals.
Who was? Zaven was?
Yeah. He had the best grade from Pro Football Focus.
And he
Take
played,
that for what it's worth.
Did he not play the most snaps on defense? Well, maybe not because they had the rotation. But he was the one guy who started every game, I think, at what it was. That was a stat. By the way, the Cardinals had the 3rd youngest roster by the end of the season in the NFL. They played the 2nd toughest schedule in 2023 when you go back and recalculate everyone's win-loss records. And 12 teams finished with 10 or more wins, double digits in wins, and the Cardinals played 8 of the 12. Think about that. And then think about, for the first time, the Cardinals went 0-for in the division. First time since the new alignment, 2002, the NFC West, Cardinals went 0-6. And the Rams ended up with the 2nd youngest roster in the NFL by the end of the season, won 7 of the last 8, obviously a playoff team. Seahawks played even more rookies than the Cardinals. We're the only team to play more rookies than the Cardinals this year. And obviously they're going to have a head coaching change. What's going to happen in Seattle?
How do you feel about Pete Carroll leaving, Paul? Well, probably going to an advisory
Okay, here we
role.
go. Here comes the monologue.
No, I'm going to miss the guy. I'm going to miss him. I mean, come on. Coach Double Rainbow, having a lot of fun, watching him warm up his arm, throwing more pregame tosses than Zach Gallen. There he is, getting the old noodle loose and ready. You know, everything's organic and antioxidant and all this stuff going on, the pure way. I mean, look, he can build a culture. There's no doubt about it. But they also are straddling that line like a Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
They're right there. They're not drafting high enough to get any game changer at quarterback. To what degree has the team tuned him out? The defense, his calling card, his side of the ball, not good for 2 straight years. I mean, not good at all. Like among the league's worst at stopping the run. And going into that season finale, if you went back over the last month of Seahawks football, he was at a loss to explain how bad the run defense was. Like, it was no comprendo for Pete Carroll. And I think at that point, management decided he doesn't look like he has any answers going forward. He's out of answers. He's out of a job. That was my take on what happened up there.
I mean, again, like I said earlier, there just comes a time when it kind of peters out and it's time to move on. And I think that's what happened with Bill Belichick. Obviously, Tom Brady mattered. Russell Wilson in his prime and the Legion of Boom mattered to Pete Carroll, obviously. It's just like players. It's rare that coaches are going to get to dictate how they walk out the door.
Well, and certain coaches are a great fit with certain rosters. That Legion of Boom with all those strong personalities and a locker room that policed itself, Pete Carroll was the perfect head coach for that. Now, if you're going to bring in a rookie quarterback, remember Geno Smith is on a glorified 1-year deal. They can cut bait from Geno Smith this offseason, and there aren't that many ramifications. So, you know, I'm curious. I think there's not only going to be a new head coach, but there's going to be a new quarterback in Seattle the Cardinals will be dealing with.
Drew Lock.
MIZ.
Stop.
Who was the team that it was Tampa, just dealt with $82 million of dead cap space this season.
This season was supposed to be their reset, and they won a playoff.
But guess what? Look at their division.
Well, and that's why.
The Cardinals are arguably going to be in the toughest division in the NFL again next year. I think the NFC West will be back to that status next year as the toughest division in the league. And so, Dani, I know I've said it ad nauseum at this point. You got to get to the quarterback, but you also have to figure out the division if you're Jonathan Gannon.
Absolutely. Especially if San Francisco is able to continue the way they've been playing and seeing what we saw from the Rams and what was supposed to be more of a transition year for them and what they were able to accomplish. And do they have a first-round pick this year,
yes,
LA?
They do.
Wow, they're back. Well, for now. They're back to first-round pick in the draft. And then if Seattle's able to turn things around, I mean, you're right. The Cardinals need to be competitive within the division because that's going to be a tough way to get to the playoffs. You know, it's not like you're playing like against the Panthers or the Bucks or the Saints, right? Like you're not in the NFC South where you can get by on maybe 8 wins and be in the playoff hunt. Whereas like Seattle was able to do that, but they weren't going to win the NFC West with that.
Yeah, I mean, you beat Dallas, you beat Pittsburgh, you beat Philadelphia, 3 playoff teams, but the 2 Rams games were lopsided. 2 Niners games, somewhat competitive, and then in the fourth quarter got sideways, both games. So, yeah, that's your task as a coaching staff, I think, is to try and get up to speed with the rest of the division. Now, which brings us to, speaking of opponents, you did play Houston and C.J. Stroud. Let's come full circle to Mr. C.J. Stroud in Houston and what he did. I was thinking to myself, when they showed the graphic that he's thrown only 5 picks all year as a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, and 3 of them were against the Cardinals.
I'm like, what? Because there's the old Peyton Manning joke. Peyton Manning loves to joke with rookie quarterbacks. Hey, feel free, bud, to break my record. Because as a rookie, Peyton Manning still holds the interception record as a rookie quarterback. I think it's 27, maybe 29 picks his rookie year. And that was a Hall of Famer, Peyton Manning. And C.J. Stroud has 5. And it's not like he's captain checkdown.
No.
That dude has a downfield passing game, always thrown to the second and third level.
In the mailbag that I posted this week, somebody asked me, the original question was, of the playoff quarterbacks, who would you trade Kyler Murray for and who would you not? Now, I'm not going there, but I was willing to for my own power rankings, do the playoff quarterbacks. And as I'm doing these, I'm realizing I think I put Stroud 4 or 5, and I'm thinking I'm surprised I have him that high, but every time I've seen him, he's been fantastic. Even against the Cardinals, when he threw 3 picks, he was pretty damn good. And that hurts.
It's impressive.
For somebody who roots against Ohio State so fervently.
It's impressive what D'Amico Ryans has done in his first year there and what Houston has done to rebuild and shift their own culture and everything they've done in Houston. It's incredibly impressive what C.J. Stroud has done in his rookie year. It sucks as a Cardinals fan,
Yep.
That's for sure, of all rookie quarterbacks to cheer for, right? Because rookie quarterbacks typically don't play this well, and when their first round draft pick is yours, right? Think about we were saying at the beginning of the season of, okay, well, let's look at Houston, like that's probably going to be a top 2, top 3 pick from them. And now look.
And rightfully so, because from 2020 to 2022, they had the lowest combined win percentage of any NFL team over that 3-year span.
When it comes to that trade, if you want to be upset the Cardinals didn't draft Will Anderson, I'm willing to, you can have that argument. Because there were plenty of people that were saying that in the moment, they should be taking Will Anderson, they shouldn't be making this trade. But don't come at me and say they shouldn't have made the trade because look what happened to that first-round pick. Nobody thought that this was going to happen. Nobody. And not the Cardinals either, I'm sure. So it's
David Tepper had to clean house in Carolina because all those experts got it wrong.
Yeah.
They took the wrong quarterback in Bryce Young.
It looks like it. It does look like it. Now, I don't know. That ended up being a mess, too. And, you wonder about if Bryce Young was coached by Bobby Slowick instead of Frank Reich. And that
maybe.
Maybe it changes up. But, yeah, and that's the thing. Going back to the other thing when you were talking about Suggs and the guy in the mailbag was complaining about how they didn't take Suggs, I'm like, okay, like – bottom line, because his point is you don't trade out of that. You take a great player and you don't trade down because that's where Hall of Famers come from the higher. And I'm sure if you break down the Hall of Famers, that yes, of course, most of them are going to be first-round picks or high picks. However, if you look at sheer numbers and volume, there's still way more first-round picks that don't ever come close to the Hall of Fame than do. And you can still make a mistake in the top 5 as we see on a yearly basis.
And by the way, put Houston under that category heading we mentioned earlier. If you get the head coach and the quarterback right, you can mask a lot of other deficiencies on your team. You get DeMeco Ryans, you get C.J. Stroud. All of a sudden, sort of like the Cardinals down the stretch, all of a sudden, Jonathan Gannon and Kyler Murray. He's playing at that level. You can go out there with a bunch of 3rd and 4th string receivers and still make it happen. So... And DeMeco Ryans is another one of those Dan Campbell, Jonathan Gannon types, right? He's kind of like half coach, half player, just the way he relates in the sideline and the energy. At least that's what the announcers were saying during the broadcast. They're talking to a lot of the Texans players. They're like, it's almost like he's a team captain again, DeMeco Ryans, the longtime linebacker of the Texans. So, by the way, I'm intrigued by your mailbag. What was the question about if you were to trade Kyler? Who would you be willing to trade him for? Was that the question?
Yeah, the original question was if you out of the playoff quarterbacks, out of the 14 playoff quarterbacks, who would you be willing to trade Kyler for, and who would you not be willing to trade Kyler for?
Because I have a good friend of mine who's a pathological Cowboys fan, and there was a text string, and one of my other buddies decided to trigger him at the end of that loss. Hey, Jarrah ain't waiting around for a rookie quarterback. He's too old. Dak ain't the guy. You think Jarrah calls up Monty Ossenfort and says, bring Kyler back to Texas. Herschel Walker trade. Here we go. You think there's...
I have heard that before, actually.
Why would, if you're the Cardinals, though, why would you do that right now?
Because they pay your price, which is obscene.
Okay, and who's your quarterback?
You're sitting there at number 4. Maybe you like Michael Penix, Bo Nix,
so
Jaden Daniels.
At the best, you're getting the 3rd best quarterback in this draft.
And you reset the rookie contract. You go. Remember, Kyler's cap number goes from
absolutely right
to $52
and you also
million
know what
next
you
year.
Have, and you don't know. And if you get Bryce Young, it doesn't matter what the princely price that you might get of draft picks. We can go back to the Herschel Walker trade. Yeah, that was incredibly one-sided. Yes, the Cowboys won. But if you look at a lot of those, half of those draft picks were just guys.
So do you think Kyler showed enough, proved enough to this new set of decision makers that they do truly know he's the guy?
I do.
I do, yes.
Okay.
You doubt that?
No, I
Darren's getting heated over here.
I'm not getting heated.
And I said this on the air before. A month ago, I wasn't so sure. Based on the last 3 halves of football, that went a long way towards solidifying his future.
And you can say what you want to say. Picking 4 instead of 1 or 2 makes a difference.
Especially for a quarterback.
Ask Chicago. If they were picking 4 and 8 instead of 1 and 8, I bet you Justin Fields is their quarterback.
Who would it be now, Darren?
We'll just have to see on that, Dani.
Oh, man.
Lincoln Riley in Dallas.
Bill Belichick in Dallas.
Oh, gosh.
Lincoln Riley to Dallas.
You guys are not saying things that I did not hear from my dad after that Cowboys loss. I was talking him off a ledge.
Should we have your dad on the podcast?
Golly.
Can we work that out, Ohms?
It's okay. All right.
How about them Cowboys?
Any other unfinished business here?
I think we've
anything
covered
else
a
you
lot.
want to say? Jordan Love. What's going on with Jordan Love? Are you kidding me? I mean, was there anything more? Look, we knew C.J. Stroud because we saw C.J. Stroud.
Yeah.
Was there anything?
Did that last touch? Oh, I think it was his last touchdown. I think it was the little sidearm whip when they were down at the 10-yard line or whatever it was. That was freaking amazing.
I mean, at that point, it was what, 48-16, right?
Well, that was the last touchdown. If it was the last touchdown, it would have been 41, whatever. But
by the way, did you see the Tampa Bay Buccaneers troll the Philadelphia Eagles with their tweet? Buy, Eagles, buy.
Yeah, that's not nice.
And then the New York Post piled on with cry, Eagles, cry.
Well, there's that.
And this all started actually with Trey McBride. When he left the field in Philadelphia, second last game of the year, he was flapping his arms and screaming, fly, Cardinals, fly.
When you look, going back to the Packers real quick, it is amazing how exactly the same Favre to Rodgers, Rodgers to Love seems to be playing out.
Yes.
Favre, when they drafted Rodgers, the fan base was like, why would you piss off Brett Favre? Brett Favre had all the fans behind him. And then at the end, when it was time to move on, he started ruining that a little bit. Then when he went on to do other things and Rodgers played well, Brett Favre became public enemy number one in Green Bay. And what's happening now? Like, everybody is like, how could you screw with Rodgers? And now that it looks like Love can play and Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, it looks like the exact same thing.
I hope this is appropriate to say on a podcast. I saw a tweet that said, as long as Jordan Love doesn't rob people of welfare money or become a conspiracy theorist, he will be a legend in Green Bay for life. And I just thought that was hysterical.
Maybe just spending all that time in Green Bay just turns a guy.
Not only is he not that guy, that former quarterback, did you see where he helped the motorist on the side of the road? Right? And then she took a selfie with him
I can't
out of a snowbank?
I'm going to tell you a story, though. This is, people can change, too. I have a friend who lives in Green Bay who did a lot of stuff with Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers, when one of his children were born, they had been doing a radio show. Aaron Rodgers showed up by himself to the hospital with flowers for his wife.
Wow.
Just to say thank you. Now, I don't think today's Aaron Rodgers does that, but people can change.
Yeah.
So we'll see where Jordan Love is in 15 years.
I will say one of the best things out of this weekend with playoffs was seeing the Bills fans shovel the snow at the stadium. And then they say, the Bills and NFL say, you know what, it's a free-for-all. Wherever you can find a spot to sit and fans are trudging through.
Is that what it was?
Or waist-high snow.
It was just general seating?
Yes. And then I love the fans that didn't even try to get rid of the snow. They were just like lying back on the seats on this. Like, I just feel like that fan base is incredible. And to do that, I'm sure is just such a cool memory to say that you helped shovel the snow and then you're going through that experience. Now, Kansas City, I don't know if that weather is worth sitting out and watching a game for with all the wind and everything. But if it's more just cold and you're able to safely get there, I loved seeing that from the fan base. It kind of looked fun. I mean, I'm glad I don't deal with that winter. I want to be clear about that.
Kansas City, the video on that was circulating on social media of the guy going into the refrigerator to pick out the ice and having it freeze after it came out of the refrigerator.
Were you seeing?
You were putting it in the refrigerator to keep it
so
liquid,
it wouldn't freeze.
So it wouldn't freeze. As soon as you took it out, gone.
Did you see the people that were drinking beers and it would be open and the beer would come out and then it would freeze so you couldn't even drink what was left in your beer? Crazy.
I just like the Buffalo. They just put the beer right in the snowbank next to their seat in Buffalo. That was, By the way, I think this weekend's games served as reinforcement as to why sideline reporters are so vital to every NFL game.
I was thinking about you, Paul.
No, we got some good info out of it. It was the radio sideline reporter, because I couldn't see the game, didn't have Peacock, and I'm stuck out in the garage replacing the spark plugs on a 25-year-old rig with my 17-year-old, and we're out there listening to the game. And the sideline reporter, she came on and said that Patrick Mahomes has his own personal heat locker on the sideline for his helmet. Not just putting it on the high top, atop the bench, the post with the heater unit. He has his own locker.
So why did it break?
That was the question. That's why it came up. Not only did it break, but he has his own personal heat locker for it. And then she did some research She said, did you know the heated bench was invented in Green Bay in 1961? The Packers actually commissioned a local heating HVAC company, and they created it and gave it to the Packers, never licensed it, never trademarked it, never asked for any money. Gave it to the Packers, and then the NFL licensed it.
No.
Yes.
I was thinking about you, the cold weather of oh my gosh, poor Paul if he had to be down there on the sideline, because I sure know I wouldn't have been.
And then Laura Oakman reported Jason Kelce, who congrats on a spectacular, all-pro career. Yeah. Jason Kelce apparently told Laura Oakman that he had a specific 3-word catchphrase that he would tell himself during each tush push.
I enjoyed this.
What was it?
Bleep my life. Snap it. Bleep my life, snap the ball, and then just lunge forward and be at the bottom of that mass of humanity. Oh my!
With no Jason Kelce, what happens to the brotherly shove?
The tush doesn't get pushed anymore.
The tush push. Prematurely retired him by at least 3 years. If it wasn't for the tush push, he probably would have played 20. Come on.
Yeah, but he got a Super Bowl ring.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I thought the sideline reporters were vital to the NFL broadcasts over the weekend. So there you go. C.J. Stroud really is the expletive here on this podcast until. Next season, we can appreciate C.J. Stroud, but as we approach the draft, not so much. And that'll do it for this edition of Cardinals Underground, brought to you by Pacific Office Automation.